We're so excited to go behind the scenes of what implementation of high quality instructional materials looks like and all of the people it takes to make it happen, many of whom we have with us today. Before we get started, I did want to go over just a couple housekeeping notes. The slides will be available after this session. And as you just heard, we're recording the webinar, and that will also be posted for folks who couldn't join or who would like to go back and watch again. You may have noticed that our chat function is enabled, and we'd love for you to interact. Please introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and engage throughout the conversation. And if you have a question for our panel, we're saving time for that at the end, so please use the Q&A function for those questions. With that said, let's go ahead and dive in. I am Jocelyn Pickford, and I am proud to be the face of CurriculumHQ, which is an initiative of the Collaborative for Student Success. Our interactive platform highlights examples of states and districts who are leading on the expansion of quality instruction across the country. If you visit the platform, you'll see we have a 50-state map with a landscape of different resources and supports that states are offering to districts doing this work. And we also share resources and stories of the work in action like you're going to hear today. We have 5 amazing guest experts with us. I'm going to tell you about the first 2 here, and then I'll introduce the others in just a little bit. So we have Grace McCarty. She's the Associate Director of Research Strategy and Policy at the Center for Public Research and Leadership, and she'll be sharing some original research they've done on Delaware. And we also have Kelly Kavarhal-Hagman, who is the Director of Curriculum and Instruction for Seaford School District, and she's going to take us behind the scenes and with a glimpse into the classroom. So we'll be talking to them in just a moment. But first, I sort of wanted to ground today's conversation in this graphic, which shows all of the different leaders it takes to do this work. We have state agencies, district leaders, educators and administrators, and professional learning leaders and families, all making sure that students can engage in high quality instructional materials. And that is what we're really going to dive into today, looking at all the different examples and ways that those people come together to help that happen. Not to mention researchers like Grace who are studying how it's going. So you'll hear more about that in just a moment. And before we dive into that, just a quick background on Delaware. This is work that the state has been doing for many years. And as you can see on the next timeline slide, this really started with Delaware getting involved with the CCSSO High Quality Instructional Materials Professional Development Network, IMPD. Hopefully many of you on the call have heard of that wonderful support system back in 2017. And then in 2018, Delaware took the important step of having a state perspective on which materials are high quality using ed reports. Starting in 2019, they had a really huge focus on professional learning, and you'll hear more about that. And the state has continued to layer supports over the years. So with that said, let's get right to it. We're going to start hearing from Grace and the exciting research on staying the course. Why strong instructional materials implementation in the first state is something worth committing to. So Grace, welcome. And can you tell us a little bit about your study?
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Really glad to be here. We can hop right ahead to the next slide because I'm going to kick off by sharing some of the goals that we set out to tackle with this research. So this study took place in the past fall between September and December. And there were sort of 3 main goals we wanted to tackle. First, we aim to identify some of the improvements that are associated with high quality instructional materials or HQIM use. Then we wanted to explore the policies and practices that support skillful implementation across the state of Delaware. And then last, we wanted to uncover some of the challenges that emerged during implementation and to develop some recommendations for addressing them. Now, if we go to the next slide, in terms of data collection, we worked with 7 schools across 5 districts. You can see them pictured here on our little map. We had Red Clay, Christina, Cesar Radney, Cape and Lopin, and Seaford. And in those districts, we conducted interviews, we did classroom observations, and we did professional learning observations. And in total, we spoke with over 100 state leaders, educators, administrators, professional learning providers, and family members about their experiences with HQIM. So thinking back to that graphic that Jocelyn showed us at the beginning, we really tried to talk to lots of those actors that are part of the mix. And in addition to talking to those actors, we also studied artifacts such as professional learning agendas, lesson plans, and reviewed relevant social media posts. So in particular, we took a look at the tweets that have gone out using the state's hashtag for HQIM, Delaware Delivers. We can go to the next slide. And broadly, what we found in this research is that HQIM implementation has been challenging, especially given the pandemic context. But despite the challenges, interviewees really reported having experienced some real instructional improvements associated with HQIM, suggesting that there's value in staying the course, if you will, with HQIM as we continue to recover from the pandemic. So I want to share more about what we learned specifically from all those conversations that I was just speaking about. But first thought it would be good to start with some numbers. So in addition to the largely qualitative data that we collected, we also took a descriptive look at recent Smarter Balanced assessment scores for some of the study sites that we worked with. And there we saw that in some study sites where HQIM are in use, student scores are improving post-pandemic, if you will, at a faster clip than what's happening statewide. And in some other study sites where HQIM are in use, we saw that scores held a bit more steady throughout the pandemic than they did statewide. Now this is just a descriptive look at student achievement data in a few study sites. So additional research would be required to formally prove a causal link between HQIM and stronger student scores, but nonetheless, the descriptive evidence is encouraging and perhaps warrants a deeper exploration. But setting the scores aside, this study really aimed to learn from the stories and experiences of people who are implementing HQIM on the ground in Delaware. And there, the idea that HQIM are benefiting teachers and students just came through loud and clear. So I want to highlight a couple themes that we heard there. First, this idea that high quality instructional materials support equity by providing access to grade level, standards aligned instruction that's more consistent classroom to classroom than it would be absent the materials, while also sort of equipping teachers with built-in intervention strategies for students who either need extra support or perhaps need an extra challenge. And then relatedly, we also learned about HQIM's built-in progress tracking systems and how those systems allow teachers to collect and analyze personalized student data so that they can make targeted instructional moves aimed at students' specific learning recovery needs. And then because the materials, go back to the other slide, just a couple more benefits. Don't want to skimp on those. They're very important. If we could go back one slide, that would be great, Josh. Thank you. And then because the materials also are guiding teachers to act as conversation facilitators as opposed to lecturers, high quality instructional materials have transform some classrooms that were traditionally more teacher-led or lecture-based into spaces where students are really leading their learning through conversation. And then beyond that, because the materials are often inquiry-based, designed around these meaty topics that kind of engage kids' natural curiosities, we also heard that folks are seeing more joy and engagement from their students. And then the last thing that I'll say, in terms of benefits, HQIM have also really helped Delaware educators stay aligned to one another in terms of what they teach and when. And this alignment is really key because it creates opportunities for learning and for improvement based on that collaboration with colleagues. Now we can pop to the next slide.
Yeah, and I just have to jump in. Anytime we can use the word joy in today's day and age when we talk about education and what's happening, and have a researcher say it is so exciting. And I love that you shared both some data highlights and those more intangible characteristics and that your research dug into that. So would love to hear now about these effective practices and challenges.
Sure thing, Jocelyn. And I think the way we're going to walk through some of the effective practices and challenges is sort of chronological. So we'll start out with some of what we heard when it comes to the idea of launching high quality instructional materials. We'll turn then to sort of some of the challenges and strengths that come up with implementation. And then if it works, we'll talk about sustainability at the end. So starting with the idea of launch. Interviewees shared a couple of key practices that they think are really important for the launch phase, the adoption phase, and the getting started phase, if you will. So first, interviewees shared that it's just crucial to deeply involve on-the-ground educators in HQIM related decision making. So for example, by involving educators in curriculum selection committees, or in one case, we heard about putting a final curriculum decision to a vote among teachers, or even by engaging educators in pilot activities. Looking at the center of the slide, we also heard from folks that in the launch phase, it's essential to provide educators with what we call models, whether peers or leaders or coaches that can really demonstrate on the ground in your classroom what strong, high quality instructional material based instruction looks like. And largely this sort of stems from the idea that this kind of instruction is new and it's challenging, and folks kind of want to see it to believe it, if you will. So those models have been really important. And then last thing I'll say about the launch phase is that folks shared with us that it's just absolutely so important that school leaders kind of roll up their sleeves and learn these materials right alongside their teachers. And sometimes that takes the form of participating in teacher-facing professional life. Sometimes it looks like spending non-evaluative time in classrooms, helping, conferencing with students one-on-one, that kind of thing.
Great. So as we move into implementation, I imagine there are many people on the call. We know we have lots of folks from different states who are at this stage. So when you're getting ready to really roll it out, what are some of the key findings that can help our audience?
Oh, absolutely. Jocelyn, there is so much we could say about implementation when it comes to what goes well and the challenges that come up. But for now, we'll talk about kind of three big themes that surfaced through this research. So first one, you see that clock icon. People talked a ton about time. For years, we've heard about the ways in which high quality instructional materials can really help save time, primarily because teachers who use high quality instructional materials don't have the burden of creating their own materials from scratch. But even so, because HQIM pushed so many of us outside our comfort zones, and because they ask us to run these student-centered classrooms when we might be used to a more traditional approach, HQIM can require more time in some cases to prepare for and to teach than some of the traditional materials, at least at the beginning stages. But we heard from a bunch of folks in Delaware who are working to tackle the time challenge. So for example, some school leaders expressed that they have moved their schedule around so that they have over an hour for both ELA and math every day, so that if teachers are a little behind on their lesson, they have a little bit of a window to catch up. And we've also heard others sort of explaining scheduling adjustments that they've made such that teachers have more effective planning opportunities so they can really get ready for these lessons, especially when they feel new. So time was an enormous theme, and thinking about scheduling and how to make the schedule match up with what HQIM sort of demand and require of us. Another question that comes up with implementation is the good old implementation with integrity as opposed to implementation with strict fidelity. So you can sort of see this one's in the middle here if you want to follow along on the slide. One worry that we heard from a lot of educators, and not just in this study, but in other studies we've done at Seaford, is that when they're asked to implement HQIM, folks worry, am I going to be expected to read from a script now? Is that what this means? But in this research, we heard from Delaware educators that they really do recognize that just using high quality instructional materials doesn't mean they have to read from a script. But in some cases, lesson adjustments are made that don't necessarily align with the intent of the materials, or that might, incidentally decrease the rigor. And so to illustrate what that could look like, for example, in a math problem, one might replace the fraction 1/8 with 1/3 because it feels more common or more accessible. Or in ELA, it might look like replacing a collaborative writing activity with some multiple choice questions to make sure that kids feel ready when it comes time for high stakes tests. But some of those changes can really deviate a bit from the intention of the materials. And this is a place where folks named professional learning as super crucial because it can kind of guide folks as they make those decisions and adjustments to suit their kids' needs. And then the last item that I'll say here also has to do with this idea of sort of differentiating instruction. So it builds on this point. And what we heard from folks is that HQIM are great and really helpful for differentiating instruction because there's so much material built in, but doing so skillfully really does require a deep knowledge of the curriculum. So to give one example of what that might look like, a coach we spoke to who uses the Bridges math curriculum explained that to help sort of accelerate learning alongside her teachers, she works with those teachers to choose slightly different math games, all rooted in the same standards for her kids to play during their group work during a math lesson. And the idea here is that those slightly different math games can kind of accommodate their different levels of development, as opposed to having all students do the exact same work, or as opposed to pulling some students out of the whole group for more remediation style instruction. But the coach really pointed out to us that this kind of an instructional move, it's pretty nuanced. And the materials are so robust that navigating them and sort of getting to that tailored move really requires support. So teachers also echoed this point, calling for more professional learning, more training and coaching focused on differentiation specifically.
Thanks so much for these super specific examples. I know we have one more set of recommendations around sustainability. If you could just quickly touch on these, and then we're going to hear from Kelly about how this is happening in Seaford.
Sure thing. So when it comes to sustainability, it boils down to two things, at least in our study. One, resources, two, feedback. Folks said that, resources are so key. In Delaware specifically, the Reimagining Professional Learning grants have been a game changer. Folks call them revolutionary. They've really made the difference and have gotten those coaches into classrooms to work with teachers in those small groups and one-on-one. We also heard a good deal about feedback. Teachers are implementing this work on the ground, and they have tons of really important ideas about how these materials might need to shift, or how professional learning opportunities might need to shift. And so that constant cycle of feedback between on the ground educator, the folks who are creating the materials, and the folks who are implementing the professional learning is another crucial part of sustaining this work going forward.
Thank you so much, Grace, for going over these. I know we're going to come back to some more of the great recommendations from this report as we go on, but now I'd love to invite Kelly to turn your camera on and take us behind the scenes into Seaford. So I've already introduced Kelly, but my favorite thing she has said to us is that she is a rebel for kids. And I hope she's going to tell us a little bit more about that. But Kelly, obviously there are several recommendations here for district leaders, which you are. And we've heard from some policymakers who just want to understand what this work looks like in action. So can you take us behind the scenes in Seaford and explain how it comes to life?
Absolutely, Jocelyn. Thank you so much for inviting me on this webinar. I'm really thrilled to be able to share some of the learning that we've had in Seaford with others around the country. So there are at least 5 ways that HQIM are operationalized and come to life in Seaford. First, there's a shared vision, and this vision is aimed at developing the knowledge, the skills, and the mindsets around what strong instruction looks like in order to lead, coach, support, teach, and really fully adopt and implement HQIM resources. And this includes the allocation of system structures such as resources and time. Second, there is an explicit and articulated focus on providing all students with equitable access to strong curriculum and instruction, grade appropriate assignments, engagement, and teachers with high expectations. And third, probably one of the most important aspects of how we've made HQIM come to life is strategic collaboration and teaming structures. And this is so that we can leverage collective expertise. We can promote and reduce variance across classrooms. This is done primarily through collaborative planning, and it is one of our most effective strategies as we try to chase equity. The shifts in how teachers plan for instructions has been one of the most challenging things that our teachers have faced as we've adopted and implemented HQIM. And while HQIM frees up their time to think deeply about the actual instructional delivery, and it gives them more time to make decisions about how to facilitate learning, rather than how they previously spent a lot of time planning and searching for and creating resources, student-facing resources. However, guiding this work for teachers is a shift, and it requires them to internalize and annotate lesson plans. And we found that this really must be a collaborative process. The fourth thing is really having a commitment to a culture of curriculum-based professional learning that is not only focused on the content, but is also responsive to educator needs and ensuring that everyone, all people in the school, have access to the HQIM while providing training and ongoing professional learning. This isn't something that you can provide training for and then, the trainers walk away and there's no follow-up. There's a couple of things that we found that have been really critical. One is that everyone in the school is an active participant in the professional learning. This means school leaders, administrators, district level leadership, teachers, specialists, classroom teachers, para-educators, even anyone who is going to be working in any instructional capacity with the students. No one is left out. And everyone, this is all goes back to the vision. Everyone has to have a clear role aligned to that common vision. And we believe that teachers embrace change and their HQIM when their leader fully embraces and supports and learns right along with the teachers. Also, leaders are better equipped to provide teachers with content-focused feedback to promote improvement and growth. Professional learning also, we found, must be job embedded and ongoing. As I said before, it can't be just a one and done kind of train everybody and then let them go approach. It has to be cyclical. That includes goal setting, a commitment to try, real-time feedback, walkthroughs, observations, more feedback, student work analysis. And I'm going to say again, that collaborative planning piece. Teachers and leaders must be together every step of the way. Lastly, in Seaford, HQIM is visible and shows up in the student learning experience. Classrooms become knowledge building centers. Students learn together with and from each other. They're noisy. Student voice is amplified and multiple ways of problem solving are recognized. Finally, all students have equitable access to rigorous grade level materials and instruction, no matter who is their teacher or their years of experience. And I would say that that is because of leveraging collaborative planning. So thanks for giving me the time to say all of those things. I tried to think about making it shorter, but we need every single one of those pieces in order to make HQIM come to life.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you just mentioned that we can't give short shrift to, excuse me, the real work that goes on behind the scenes here. And speaking of the scenes, here we have some of your wonderful students. And I know that you are such a cheerleader for these folks, and it's just great to see the work in action. And so what we'd like to do now is turn to a couple more recommendations for educators and administrators who obviously you work with and for. And these really focus again on that professional learning and teacher collaboration. You've touched on this a little bit so far in your comments, but I was wondering if you could specifically talk about the difference between acceleration and remediation and how teachers can use quality materials. And this gets back to Grace's point about the differentiation. How can these materials be used but tailored to help accelerate students?
Absolutely. And this is really important work, especially coming out of the pandemic, where students were at lots of different places in their learning. Some were ready to go and others were not ready yet. They were not at grade level yet. And so we found that accelerating learning is not just a smart thing to do. It's a matter of equity and closing the opportunity gaps that really exploded during the pandemic. And through a shared responsibility model, we have nearly abolished remediation in Seaford. All of our supports are push-in supports, so that any interventions that students experience, it's in the classroom setting. And that's one of the most important things I think that people really need to think about and shift, because it requires structural changes to master schedules and how we allocate staffing resources. And our focus is to accelerate students by moving forward on grade level content. Specifically, that means that all of the scaffolds and mini lessons are aligned to the core curriculum. Everything we do is aimed to set students up for success with just-in-time support, extra dosage of lessons on required foundational skills aligned to what they need to know and be able to do. I can illustrate this with our core literacy curriculum, which is bookworms, reading and writing. And within the core curriculum, it encompasses all of Tier 1 and Tier 2 differentiation instruction. But we know that some students need more time or repetitions to read their grade level benchmark, and their needs are not going to be met with just Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction. So the research that we've looked at has indicated that adjunct intervention materials prevent the transference of skills to the general curriculum. So we have partnered with researchers from the University of Delaware, and we're using what's called Bookworms Intensive, BWI, and that leverages specific materials from the core curriculum aligned to the strongest evidence-based procedures to strengthen children's focus and feedback during explicit teaching in very small groups. And we've seen the data to prove that this is a model of acceleration that works with students, and that students in Seaford who are engaged in BWI improved their reading skills and made gains at accelerated rates. And we've seen this in grade levels that are traditionally harder to close gaps in third, fourth, and fifth grade among students who strengthened their reading fluency and accuracy and got on grade level in a short amount of time.
It's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing that and that level of detail. And, again, you've talked about the data, but what I hear evident in your voice is the joy, that same joy that Grace talked about. So can you just tell us a little bit about why do you call yourself a rebel for kids? What's the joy that you take in this work?
Well, I am relentless about a focus on student learning. I constantly interrogate the curriculum and instruction that our students are exposed to. And I always ask, how can we best demonstrate the brilliance of our students? I believe in an asset-based approach to everything that we do. Our learners come to us with so many assets, and it's our job to build upon their funds of knowledge and to strengthen their cognitive muscles. Some people get frustrated with me because I will never tolerate anyone claiming that the rigor is too challenging or that the work is impossible. I refuse to accept any excuses, and I demand staff to find the how, and then I expect them to do it. So that pretty much sums it up.
Wonderful. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. I know we're going to come back to you during the Q&A at the end, but now we're going to hear a little bit about the role that the state education agency plays in supporting this work. So I would love to welcome Kathy Kelly and Monica Gant to the screen. Dr. Monica Gant is the Chief Academic Officer at the Delaware Department of Education, and Kathy Kelly is the Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Professional Development at the department. And we are thrilled they're with us. And in just a little bit, Jen Vranick is going to join us. And Jen is the founding and managing partner of Education First, who has been a great partner to the state in this work. So thank you so much, Kathy and Monica, for being with us. We're going to now look at some other recommendations from the CPRL report that Grace talked about and ask you both to just reflect a little bit about how the state has made it easier for districts to make better decisions, smarter, better decisions for kids around curriculum and professional learning.
So Jocelyn, thank you so much. And if I can go off script a little bit. So Kelly's a rock star, and Really appreciate her commitment to the students and the children in Delaware. So Delaware's instructional vision is that every learner across the state leaves school ready for success in college, career, and life. In order to achieve this vision, teachers must provide students with high quality standards aligned instruction every day. And for teachers to be fully prepared for every lesson, school leaders must then provide teachers with standards aligned instructional materials and the support needed to use those materials well. The state embraces its role as a support agency. In this role, we strive to make the right choice the easy choice. We support districts and charters by providing guidance and piloting, selecting, launching, and implementing instructional materials, such as a curriculum support guide from instruction partners. So in this first bullet, you'll notice, continue to facilitate inter-district collaboration grounded in specific HQIM. We have leveraged our size, and we're small, a small state, but we've leveraged this size, taking advantage of being a small state where we can meet with the curriculum directors like Kelly and content area supervisors on a regular basis. The state works with content leaders in 2 curriculum specific cohorts to expand their knowledge. One such cohort is Easy Network, which for those who are using Eureka, Zern, and Engage. And then the other is the Bridges cohort for those who are using the Bridges curricula. Also, content leaders, creating a cohort of experts across the state in ELA and mathematics. And so we've done work with them as well. The second is continue reimagining professional learning grant making in ways that support collaborative long-term professional learning. In Delaware, the purpose of professional learning is to build all educators, administrators, coaches, and teachers, and Kelly spoke about this, their capacity to create successful learning for each and every student. Educators committed to high quality professional learning hold high expectations and assess professional learning's impact on educators and students. Through our RPL grants, our goal is to create sustainable professional learning conditions and processes aligned to high quality instructional materials that lead to improved teacher practice and student learning. And then finally, the Department of Education hosts an annual professional learning summit connected to our Reimagining Professional Learning grants. All school systems and leaders are invited to this annual summit to learn more about creating strong professional learning systems, but it is a requirement for those hoping to receive support from the state through an RPL grant. I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Thanks, Dr. Gant. So you can go ahead and bring in the third one, Josh. Thanks. So developing a shared vision for how HQIM interact with standardized assessments, we've been able to bring in experts such as, and that's through our connection with CCSSO and the IMPD network, bringing in those experts such as Ed Report, Student Achievement Partners, Dr. David Steiner, to meet with our district leaders, share background and the why around those instructional materials. They've helped us as a state to better understand how instructional materials support the changes that Kelly just talked about, and those changes in teacher practice and ultimately in impacting student learning. As we move forward in the work, we intend to strengthen those connections for LEAs between their core instructional materials and the state summative assessments and resources. We know and appreciate that there's still work to be done there, and that's one of the things on our agenda to really make intentional connections for our LEAs moving forward. And then also communicating the benefits of HQIM via social platforms that educators use most. And I think Grace mentioned it in the beginning, our Delaware Delivers hashtag, which we launched that hashtag to get the word out and share the positive work happening across the state around high quality instructional materials and the necessary professional learning that it takes to move this work forward. As you could tell by all of the things that Kelly said have to be in place to make this work in a district and in a school. It's hard work, and there's a lot of districts and charters out there that are doing this amazing work. And so we wanted to share that with everyone else across the state. So we started this Delaware Delivers hashtag and started getting it trending on Twitter as best we could. And so, and the work we've done is really through, it started through the Knowledge Matters campaign when they came out to visit our state. And first they did an ELA tour and then a mathematics tour. So that really help to get our work moving forward around social media and multiple social platforms. It's just one of those things that, you know, as educators, we don't think to share our story and praise ourselves. We're always very modest about the work that we're doing. So trying to get, and Kelly is a rock star at tweeting. Like, I spend a lot of time just liking and retweeting Kelly's stuff because it's so amazing. So
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I agree. It's been such a joy for me over the past 2 years to engage in this community on social media. There are so many cheerleaders out there who are doing this work and see the impact that it has. And that's a great transition to our next slide, where so we heard from the rockstar Kelly, the Rebel for Kids in Seaford. We know that there are other districts throughout Delaware who are also seeing a lot of great momentum. So would love for you both to just talk a little bit about, once a district makes the decision to commit to these materials, how does the state support implementation?
Sure. So I'll start and then Kathy will join in. In our role as a support agency, we work with districts and charters to ensure educators are shifting from initial adoption to skillful implementation of their instructional materials. And we're really purposeful about that language, skillful. We serve in many roles depending on how the district or charter may choose to engage with our team members. Some may want thought partners, technical advisors, or advice on professional learning plans. Others are deeply engaged in our Reimagine Professional Learning grants, where they get support, direct support and guidance from our liaisons in their implementation through regular check-ins and review of evidence and data.
And as you can see by this slide here, these are just some districts highlighted in the report who really leaned into their HQIMs during COVID. And they're seeing a return on that investment. So Seaford has moved from, and I can say this because I know Kelly would, Seaford has moved from last in the state in 2015 to outperforming state averages across every school. And then when we look at Brandywine, Claymont Elementary School here saw ELA proficiency scores rise 21% in school year 21-22. So that's 3 years after adopting one of their curricula. So those are just a couple of examples, but when people are leaning into their curricula and sticking to it and embracing professional learning, we see outcomes there.
And here's some examples of what district leaders have told us about how their HQIM improves student learning. And so Michelle Hawley from Brandywine said, our teachers are stepping back more and letting students lead the conversation. I heard, and I keep calling Kelly out, but I heard her talk about, you know, students leading the conversations. The other day, I heard one of our teachers say that she didn't realize what her students were really capable of until she let them do the talking. Darren Guido of Cesar Rodney shared, with these new materials, we're seeing our teachers begin to trust that students will rise to the level of expectations you have for them with the right support. And we heard about just-in-time support. And then finally, Kristen Book from Brandywine, a reading specialist there, shared, by targeting decoding skills, we can get to fluency much faster. So these are just real ways in which it's happening in our districts across the state.
Thank you so much. I think the voices really bring it to life. And again, you're both balancing, you know, the data with the stories, and just agree how important both of those are. So I think we're going to transition now to talking a little bit about data outcomes, and something, as you know, state education agency leaders, I'm sure you talk a lot about. How are you looking at data outcomes at the state level, and what are some things other states should be thinking of in terms of tracking this kind of data?
Sure, Jocelyn. We want to start by prefacing that although these are not the proficiency levels that we would want to see, nor are we settling with these as stellar proficiency rates, we do want to highlight that those schools that have leaned into their HQIMs and skillful implementation of those resources, especially during COVID, have experienced greater results compared to their peers. So they're often seeing less of a drop in student achievement and more students staying on or closer to grade level. And so you can see this here in some of the math resources and some of the schools that we've highlighted here. And these are not all of them. This is just a subset that we pulled. And then on the next slide, you can see similar trends in ELA with those who stayed true to their high quality materials, seeing proficiency rates above the state average. So we're working with our DOE data team at this time to pull data, look for patterns, make some connections between the materials, the professional learning, and then look for advice and additional resources that we can give to our districts and charters. But this is the first time we've really been able to get that kind of data from our data team and dig in. So it's a massive data collection, but they've been really excited to have this kind of input that we've been able to give them to give us such a great output as we move forward.
Thank you for sharing that. I know in talking to some other states that the data piece, in this realm is challenging because there's, the need to track how the curriculum is being implemented and how it's being used, and then take the time, and not everyone wants to see results right away. But I love the thoughtful approach and the way that you've really looked at this over time and with how long Delaware has been doing this work. So I just really want to shout that out and note to folks that, the data piece is complicated.
And that's absolutely true, Jocelyn. We know that this work does take time, and we're trying to acknowledge that in Delaware. It takes time to change the overall system, to create spaces where educators can receive the professional learning that they need and deserve. The professional learning comes in many forms. As Dr. Gant mentioned a few slides ago, it can be professional learning sessions, coaching, walkthroughs, professional learning communities, collaborative planning. Teachers spend time learning their materials well and then make changes to their practice. That all takes time. Student outcomes come after that time is well spent. And so that's what we're trying to monitor that as we move along. And everyone's at a different place in different content areas. So we're trying to take all of that into account.
Thank you. I think on the next slide, we just want to touch a little bit about on how the state supports, and we've heard a lot about this already, but how are you supporting cooperation and coordination between districts, across districts, from the state with you have so many, people making it work, the professional learning leaders, the families. How is the state leaning into those types of connected supports?
Sure. I'll start and then I'll toss it over to Dr. Gant to finish us off. But one of the most important strategies we've built in Delaware was our vendor marketplace. We've conducted a rigorous request for proposal process to find partners for both the SEA and the LEA that could support districts and charters in all aspects of HQIM implementation through high quality professional learning. The result of this request for proposal was Delaware's online vendor guide, which I believe we're going to put in the chat for you. So that just helps our districts not have to go through the request for proposal process. We've done that for them. We've already identified who those high quality professional learning partners are and signaled all of that for them so that they are able to just take a look at that vendor guide, decide who might work for them, and then just jump right into the professional learning that they need.
Thanks, Kathy. And then examples of how the state Department of Education supports and encourages cooperation and coordination between districts, professional learning leaders, and families includes modeling effective instruction and effective coaching with HQIM. So Delaware's online vendor guide, which points districts and charters to high quality professional learning partners who can support them through the various stages of piloting, adoption, launch, and implementation, as Kathy just shared. The Delaware Department of Education also meets with these vendors quarterly to ensure that they are aware of our key priorities, initiatives, and messages that are essential to the work in Delaware. So they are truly partners with us. Guiding teachers to take advantage of the differentiation supports built into HQIM. Internally, our team in curriculum instruction and professional development works across the department and within other work groups to build understanding around the HQIM and where to find supports for unique learners. Also, support for unique learners is something that selected vendors in Delaware's vendor guide are skilled at leading in professional learning sessions with LEAs. Now, with educators co-creating approaches to partnering with families around HQIM, this is an area that recommendations tell us should be more embedded into our professional learning work across the state and should be topics of conversation during our quarterly vendor calls. So this is something we certainly will incorporate with our calls with our DE professional learning partners. And then finally, soliciting educator feedback and adjusting curriculum and professional learning approaches accordingly. Soliciting educator feedback is an integral part of the RPL grants process. Systems work with partners and the SEA to gather feedback on HQIM and high quality professional learning implementation on the ground. This is also something the partners identified within the online vendor guide are familiar with gathering as part of their work with Delaware schools.
Thank you so much. Thanks to both of you for sharing all this. I'd now like to welcome Jen Brannick onto the screen from Education First. And we're going to turn back to the graphic that we started with at the beginning. And as we sort of refresh ourselves again on all of the different entities it takes to do this work, can you talk to us about the role Education First serves and how you all help all these different groups engage?
Sure, thanks, Jocelyn. Well, Education First is a national policy practice and implementation consulting organization. So we actually work with all of these groups, state agencies, state boards, school systems, also teacher prep programs who are guiding and supporting teachers, and nonprofits and foundations to address and build more coherent and equitable strategies. In the IMPD initiative, we've been one of the organizations supporting Delaware from the get-go. And that work has looked like doing a lot of what, like Dr. Gant described, what the state is doing to help and thought partner and provide technical assistance to districts. That's what we have been doing with the Delaware Department. So we bring ideas of what works from other states. We help the state set goals for HQIM adoption or plan programs like the district cohorts. We help them think, what is it district leaders need? What's working or not working in professional learning? And what's the role of building leaders and other educators to support teachers in learning to use HQIM. So really helping plan better programs, take stock of progress, and be their thought partners to make sure that what is happening is what we want to see happening. This is continuously improving work that is never done.
Thanks for that. Why is it important for systems to engage all these different partners? Tell us a little bit about what you've seen in Delaware.
Yeah, I mean, this is incredibly difficult work. Our panelists have made this sound easy today, but literally among them and their teams, they've invested thousands of hours in selecting materials, working with teachers to try those out and make it seem like and decide that these are the right materials. Working with teachers to actually use the materials and use them as intended and not adjust them in ways that don't work. And so that students are having that experience where they are the ones doing the talking. That is big shifts in teacher practice. And it's very hard for school systems on their own to make these shifts without thought partners who can help nudge, who can help point to where it's working in other places, who can say, here's the evidence-based practices. What did you see today? So there's a number of us like this who are helping at the local level, who've been really instrumental in the work of Delaware, who are part of the state's HQPL vendor guide that the state has really led the way on piloting in the IMPD network. So, all of these organizations have a critical role to play, and they need help making the dots and connections across each other. And to make the most of their efforts, they need the cheerleading and the thought partnership that everybody needs when you're doing really hard work.
That's so well said. Thanks, Jen. I think that interconnectedness, that sort of community of cheerleaders is so important. And we've heard that from all of our speakers about the need for stories, the need for, supports, both human and, resources and different ways that people can see examples of the work. And when you're at the beginning, you feel like you're at the bottom of the mountain, knowing that there is a top and that you'll get there and that, there'll be challenges, but that it's time worth spending and worth investing in. So I really want to thank everyone for emphasizing all those points. And I'd like all of our speakers to come back on camera now. We have about 10 minutes left for Q&A. We have a couple so far in the chat that we'll start with, and feel free, folks joining us, to add others. And then I, of course, have a few. But to start off, we had a question about what has been seen in Delaware with English learners. So Kelly, would welcome you to jump in on that, and then anyone else.
Absolutely. This is actually one of my passions. I started out in education as a bilingual teacher working in a dual language immersion school. English learners are one of the most critical groups that we have. And in Seaford, we have a very diverse district. We're pretty much 1/3 African-American, 1/3 white, and 1/3 multilingual learners. And I will say that through the adoption and implementation of HQIM, particularly with our literacy curriculum, our English learners have really thrived. So much so that the state has recognized us on a couple of occasions for closing achievement gaps among our multilingual learner population. Because we've been able to not only accelerate their English language development, but also their scores on the state summative tests. So there are more English learners approaching grade level expectations or at grade level expectations than ever before. And I really attribute that to the quality of the instructional materials, and that, as I said before, that shared approach. No longer are our ELs leaving the classroom to go get some other kind of instruction. Everyone is in the room together and doing everything that they can for those students. And the results really speak for themselves. I'm really proud of our results. Particularly during the pandemic, when one of our elementary schools was recognized as a National School of Distinction, and that was because of their progress with English learners.
Amazing during the pandemic. Anyone else want to touch on English learners? Yeah, I'm not sure anyone could say it better than that. So thank you for that.
Kelly really is our best example of the work that's happened with English learners in the
And it's such an important group, and one that we hear questions about so often, and we hear concerns about what's happened during the pandemic. So really glad we could touch on that here. We also had a question, and I believe it's been answered in the chat, but a good one to raise here about some of the data that was shown on a previous slide with the schools that are doing, where there's some data showing improvements relative to the state average. And the question was, how did those schools perform relative to the state average before the implementation of quality materials?
And I did answer that one in the chat, and they are some were near, or a little closer to the state average. Excuse me, some were below, some were well below. It just depends. And then of course, COVID makes it hard to get data and draw those absolute causal correlations, but so they were a little all over the map, but it was definitely in the data that we were able to pull, we were able to find increases in their data, and with those that we're leaning into and using high quality instructional materials.
Yeah, and can I just add one thing to that, Kathy? Because
Absolutely.
I just wanted to advocate that we had a very conscious choice in Seaford to lean into our HQIM during the pandemic. There was so many materials that were being thrown at us and were suddenly available, and people were offering free licenses to try and pilot and do all these different supplemental things that were supposed to solve all of the problems of the pandemic. And in Seaford, we really thoughtfully said, no, we are going to lean in, know what's right for our kids, and we're going to intensify the research-based practices that we believe in. We did ask for help from our experts at UD, and we said, how can we intensify? How can we shift and adapt? But we didn't look to something else, another alternative. It was the core, because we knew that that's where the rigor was going to lie and what kids needed.
I'm so glad you said that. It's the staying the course, right? It's the title of the report that Grace went over with us before. So thank you so much for emphasizing that. We do have a question that was posed for you, Jen, to start off with. What are some specific ways that you help schools understand implementation with integrity instead of fidelity? And how do you help teachers part ways with teacher-created materials that they're attached to?
Going straight for the easy questions. I think those two questions are at some of the core of what's hardest about moving from once you've adopted an HQIM to really using it. And it's a really big issue in a lot of places. Fidelity versus integrity has been a huge issue in Delaware. Fidelity really had meant to a lot of people in the earlier years of implementing Common Core. We do exactly what it says on the page, exactly this moment, exactly this day. And with integrity is helping people see that you want to get at the underlying essence. You can't modify the materials in ways that lower the rigor or reduce the grade level content, which is often what happens when teachers are using the materials for a variety of reasons. And so when our teams are in working side by side with Kelly's teams and coaches, what they're doing is they're helping them say, what's the core mathematical practice? What's the core foundational reading skill that is here? And that is what we're teaching. And this task or problem or text and set of questions we ask about the text, that's how using that is going to be how you get at that core underlying skill or practice that you're trying to get students to really grasp. And so that's just really hard work. You really have to be in there using your PLC time, using your coaching time, using the materials at the core of those opportunities. It's not just talking about teaching decoding in the absence of the materials. It's what was it in this text? What are the words? How are we applying it here in this text? And so that's the hardest work. I'm going to defer to Kelly or others to answer the second question about helping teachers part ways. So I think it's like with any change management initiative, sometimes you got to see it to believe it, and you just got to get in there and use it. But let's hear what Kelly or Grace, who saw this in lots of places, what do y'all think?
I can chime in, Jen. I think that definitely the seeing to believing, that's what we heard teachers tell us. I would say, we talked to lots of teachers over the course of the fall, many of whom were in the position of at one moment feeling, oh my gosh, my old curriculum's gone. Now what? But what I can remember, one teacher in particular who taught second grade and said, at first, I was not there for this illustrative math. I did not want to do it, but I saw the scores after a year, and I saw, okay, I'm teaching in a way that feels a little bit different, and I'm kind of used to laying out my curriculum in a particular sequence, and this year I'm doing it differently. And at first I felt really worried that are my kids going to get all the content? But then when I actually saw the growth that my students had on our informal assessments over the course of the year, I bought into it. I saw that it works, she said. And so I think that what you said is exactly accurate, Jen. And then the other thing that I would add, I guess, to go back to the question of fidelity versus integrity, I think something that is not said enough about these materials is the idea that the way they're built sort of requires an integrity approach, because they're so personalized to the students that are there in the classroom, and the teacher takes on the role of a facilitator. And I'm thinking, Kelly, of the example that we have in the report from one of your math classrooms of one of the teachers who is teaching a math classroom, and they're leading this discussion with illustrative math with a bunch of students, and they sort of give them this big array of flags, and the students have to say what they notice and wonder about the flags. There's no way to script what that teacher should say. And the reason is kids are going to react in the way they're going to react. And the teacher's job is to know the materials so deeply and know the goal of the instruction so deeply that they can make specific moves in specific moments to react to kids. And so I think that that's a piece that's built into these materials that I find so powerful, that, I don't know, I think sometimes we miss when we get too focused on fidelity and integrity and all that.
Yeah, I agree, Grace. And I think that one of the underlying reasons that we find this is that the materials are educative, that they are not just materials that are for the students, but they're educating and guiding the teachers so that when they do have to make those decisions, their decision-making power is stronger. And then the only thing I would add on to that is the power of collaboration, so that no teacher is making those decisions in isolation, because there's a lot of variance across classrooms, teachers, levels of experience, and that if they're working together as a team, you can really leverage that collective expertise so that they can try different things and try new things based on the needs of their students. And facilitating that kind of environment has really opened up people's classrooms, and they're able to share because they have the time to share. I would also add, because they're not spending time hunting for things, looking for things online, looking for, you know, the next thing that they can do so that their kids get it. They have more time to collaborate.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And I'll tell you, if I could go back in time and give myself in the classroom when I was an English teacher these resources and materials, it would have not only saved that time, but would have made me a better teacher, I have no doubt. So we're at the end of our time, but I just want to thank all of you. I want to thank Grace and Kelly and Kathy and Monica and Jen for bringing this work to life. I think they're incredible examples that were given today. I know I've learned a lot. I hope our audience has. And just a quick note that please feel free to reach out to us. There's contact information here at the Collaborative for Student Success. This is what we're about, elevating these stories, sharing them so other districts and states can learn from them. And we'd love to hear what other folks are up to. So please be in touch. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.